ask each person to do, okay, this side again, is come up. This is an old form, which we'll discuss a little bit. Come up and stand or kneel. Bring your cushion with you if you want to sit on your cushion for a minute. It's not a long thing. And you bring up something, a comment or question that you have, and then I do my best to answer. And when you're satisfied with the answer, you say, thank you for your teaching, and I say, may you be well. And you go back, somebody else comes up. Now, if anything that is said is unclear, anybody in the audience can say, unclear, or please clarify, anything like that, raise your hand, or just shout it out. This is a very informal kind of thing. And then we go on a little further to try to clarify it. Or if you have some particular thing you want to ask or say about what's been said and get more clarification. So it's meant to be a dialogue. The way this came about, I understand, is there was a great teacher in China who had 5,000 monks and nuns living there. This had to be a big place, like for 5,000 people. But they had this problem of how do you expose each student or monk or nun, how do you expose them to this teacher on a personal basis? We do Dokusan, right? But imagine if you were one of 5,000. How often would you get to, meet with that teacher? You can have plenty of dialogues between, groups and Dharma brothers and sisters, and many of those are the most famous anecdotes in the history of Zen. Exchanges that occurred between peers within the Sangha or community. So what they would do is they trot this old guy out on a dais, raise a platform outside, right? Everybody would gather in the field, I guess. 5,000 people, pretty big crowd. And one brave soul would step up and say something. And the old guy would be a couple of back and forth exchanges, but this allowed everybody to witness kind of a public Dokusan. We do Dokusan in private, but in researching the old Dogen's teacher, Myojo, in China, or Rujing, Japanese, Chinese pronunciations. He was outside, apparently, on a platform of some sort, and they had a screen around him, probably a bamboo screen, a U-shaped screen. And there was a bigger one around that, forming kind of like a piece of a maze, right? Where you'd come in here, you'd do your bows, and you'd ask your question. And when you were done, you'd go out the other way, and then somebody else would come in. So they're all waiting outside the big screen. There's no acoustical privacy. You can hear what is being said. Right? Visual privacy, you can't see. So I think we tend in the West to overdo the privacy thing a lot. You get into some slippery slopes like privileged conversations. Somebody comes in and tells you they're about to rob a bank, what are you going to do? Or they're going to commit suicide. So there are ethical issues that come into play around these privileged conversations. So I am a little more in favor of this kind of open dialogue, but I do appreciate over the years, Dokusan has allowed me to have one-on-one conversations with a lot of people where we wouldn't have had those conversations otherwise. So I think probably both public and private. So I want to read a little bit, and I want to kind of plant a seed by quoting a little bit from Bodhidharma's life. And you can take what he said, what happened, what he said, as kind of a koan, and maybe it's a jumping off point for a question you might have today. But your comment or question can come from anywhere else as well, anywhere in your life. And towards the end, those who are too shy to come up, too modest, you can just call out questions from where you are, where you are sitting. So any questions so far? Anybody? I don't know your name. You're new to me?
new to you.
Yeah, what's your name?
Daniel.
Daniel, welcome. This
Thank
your
you.
first time here?
First time here at the center.
But you practiced elsewhere, obviously.
I practiced Zen for a while back in Utah, and then also with my team, and recently at the Shambhala Center.
Okay, good. Okay, so you're not
For
giving your
practice.
turn. Okay, welcome.
Thank you.
The Zen is not always great here, but the tea is always great. So, before starting with Bodhidharma, I want to read something that I came across while I was researching. By the way, this is a book we recommend, highly recommend. The Shambhala Dictionary of Buddhism and Zen. Some of you may be familiar with. It's three different people, three different experts put this together. They simply try to define terms. And however, within it, they have little parentheses and arrows pointing at other terms. So within a definition of one term, they will refer you to related terms, which is really great because then you can sort of follow a thread through and get a much more well-rounded definition of what this term means and how it fits into context, if you will. So, and they seem to be not just scholars, but they seem to have experience, at least from my reading of their definitions. The nice thing about a dictionary is it's not trying to sell you an interpretation. It's not trying to sell you a philosophy or promote to you some kind of angle on this. They're simply defining these terms, and it allows you to sort of thread your way through it yourself. So it's very neutral in that sense. That's why I highly recommend it. This sort of doesn't matter where you're coming from on your personal path. This is a useful tool for you to use. Anybody familiar with the Devil's Dictionary, Ambrose Bierce? Anybody? So that was a case where he did lay out philosophy by defining terms. He just wrote a dictionary. He didn't call it Devil's Dictionary, the publisher did, I understand. Ambrose Bierce was a weird character in the 1800s, a cowboy Western guy. He was said to have shot a man for snoring. He disappeared somewhere in Mexico. So he defined art. He said, this term has no definition. Or accident was something like the inevitable result of immutable physical law. So he just went through the alphabet with words that he wanted to define. And I've been thinking of doing that with like the Demon's Dictionary of Zen or something. Mm-hmm. Just take a word that we all take for granted. We think we know what it means and give a definition that's, you know, contrary to what we think. So anyway, this is a good one. This is one we recommend highly. Not that we don't recommend Dogen and the others who do kind of have an axe to grind. They have a good axe to grind. So it's saying keep your doubt at a keen edge, right? Like sharpening a knife or sharpening an axe. And if you want doubt, you don't have to go much further than Dogen. He will take your mind apart for you. So in the Bodhidharma thing, the PN-Fu, which is the Hekigan Roka or blue cliff record, or here they call it blue-green cliff record, some of you are familiar with the collection of koans. Koans were largely recordings of these kinds of anecdotes that happened between teachers and students. Not that ours will rise to that level here, so don't worry about today. Collection of koans and so forth, and it goes through the history of that document. That's
so this is for that's a hot seat.
Yeah.
Okay, hot seat.
So these commentaries and incidental remarks on the koans, explanations of the koan, commentaries and explanations of the praising these teachers, all sort of piled up. This guy put an original collection of 100 koans together and added all this commentary to it. And says because of this complexity and the literary refinement, there's a point being made here, which I think is an important one to make. Because of this complexity and the literary refinement of the text, many Zen masters have a higher regard for the Wumen Koan, which is simpler in form, since in their opinion it gets more directly and less figuratively, quote, to the point. So the whole point of these exchanges is kind of get to the point of why we're doing this, much like the wayfinding talk that we mentioned earlier. The danger posed by the literary beauty of the Blue-Green Cliff record was already seen by the Chen master, who was the student and Dharma successor of the master who put it together. When he saw, this is the shocking part, and this has happened more than once in history. When he saw that his students had the tendency to get involved in the qualities of the verbatim text rather than attend to the immediate experience that is its true content, he had all available copies of the Pinyin Lu collected and burned. Imagine if I had all the copies of Matsuoka Roshi's teachings collected and burned in a big book. You gotta have some confidence in what you're doing. With all respect for the great work of his master, he was more concerned for the survival of the latter's Dharma teaching than for that of his writings. So understand that point. He's saying that the writings are attempts, of course, to capture the Dharma teachings, but they're not the same thing. That's a difficult one, right? Because especially here, we have such respect for erudition and books, right? We're very bookish. Fortunately for posterity, however, the greater part of this precious text was preserved in a few, though not entirely complete copies. From these, a Chinese layman was able in the 14th century to reconstruct the full text with the exception of a few passages. So especially when we're looking into the written record, we always have to keep this in mind that it has a history and that you have a lot of doglegs in that history, side streets, and there's a lot of scholarly discussion, argument around the legitimacy of a given teaching when there are no Sanskrit versions of it extant. And even Sanskrit, even the Buddhist teachings were not written down for at least 400 years. So, but we have a 180-degree take on that as well. We think that because they were handed down orally for 400 years, they're more correct. Because once you have it written down, anybody can change it, either intentionally or by accident. So in Zen, we rely on our own direct experience and the whole history of the authority of Zen teachers. My authorization doesn't come from Matsuoka Roshi's anointing me. It comes from my own experience. And he wouldn't have recognized that if I didn't have any experience. These days, it's experience, expression. These days, expression has taken such predominance over experience. You have all kinds of relatively inexperienced people publishing New York bestsellers. Mm. So we want to insist upon the primacy of experience, and it's the same for you. I do my best to express my understanding, but it's not. Sensei Matsuoka Roshi said, you can talk all day and never make them understand. So you can maybe rely on me for a lot of things, but what you can't rely on me for is your own understanding, right? That's a very fundamental premise in Zen. So don't get the wrong idea with what we're doing here, that I'm somehow wise and going to help illuminate you. Even Buddha can't help you. Buddha didn't understand this. So he did his best to translate it into expression and did a good job, right? As far as we know from the written record, which is only the copy of the oral record. Let's stop there and see if anybody, I see you smiling. I get it, he says. So let's see if anybody has any comment on that before we go forward with the content of today. So this is not meant to be a limiting content or delimiting content. This is simply meant to give you a little inspiration. I even thought of handing out little pads and pens, but we couldn't find any pens. So Bodhidharma was this Dharma in Japanese. They think around 470 to 543, the 28th patriarch after Shakyamuni in the Indian lineage, the first Chinese patriarch. Most of you already know all that. Huika, who we mentioned, he installed as the second patriarch in Zen. And Sengsan, who composed the Sensei Ming, or Faith Mind, or Trust in Mind, which is part of our liturgy, very long poem. Around 600 was the third. So I'm going to read you what he said to his teacher, Hanyatara, who Joseph mentioned we think was a female, was a woman. The Bodhidharma's teacher was one of the few female in the formal lineage. There's a whole lineage of female ancestors, starting with Prajna, what's her name? Something Pajapati, who was, I think, Buddha's mother. But they, all down through, they get to be more of them in China, a whole lot more in Japan, and a whole lot more in modern times. Female teachers who are in the lineage and recognized. I think they just weren't recorded. But we think there are probably thousands and thousands of male teachers that never got recorded in the lineage. So the so-called unbroken lineage we have represents a very thin stream running down through the history of Zen. But nonetheless, Hanyatara, his teacher, asked Bodhidharma, apparently when he's younger, among all things, what is formless? Master Bodhidharma said, non-arising is formless. So there's one for you. Then she said, among all things, what is the biggest? Master said, the nature of dharmas, the nature of dharmas is the biggest. Here, dharmas might be understood in the sense of beings, dharma beings. So he goes on with some of the history here. And this is what he looked like, something like this. He was Indian when he came to China. I think most of the paintings of him, probably all the paintings of him, are from China. I have one that was given to Diana and I at her wedding by one of our patrons. It looks very realistic, almost like a photograph. It's a brush painting on rice paper, but it's extremely realistic. Most of the ones you see are like this, right? And big eyes. And the legend is he cut off his eyelids because he kept falling asleep. That's it. T-legend. I want to pass this around again. Joe, did you happen to translate this last time you were here? Did you happen to do that?
No, you had me look at it a long time ago.
Yeah, you might take another look at it. One thing I want you to know is I'm pretty sure this has got to be Bodhidharma. I mean, look at the hair, bald head.
Yeah.
This would not be typical of Chinese, and a lot of face hair. He was said to have red hair and blue eyes. He was a red-headed barbarian, red-bearded barbarian. Barbar means from outside, right? And so in China, anybody coming to China like this would be barbar.
Somebody kind of said he was Persian.
Something might have been Persian. Take a look at the statue. Look at it closely. Look at his eyes. Get past that around to everybody. His eyes are closed, which tells me that wasn't made by somebody who does Zen meditation. Closing your eyes is a mindfulness meditation. As we often ask, how mindful can it be if your eyes are closed? So in Zen, we keep our eyes open. Not as a bite or dictum, but just in general to stay in contact with the environment. This again was painted, these come with blank eyes and you paint the black in. So a group of us, when we were first moving over here, I painted the first little tiny pupil, and then somebody painted around it. And this one is left blank until after the move and everything was accomplished. So then this one was filled in. So these are used as symbols of a project and starting and getting it done, kind of thing. Also, the nesting dolls in Japan are Bodhidharma dolls. He's kind of like a Santa Claus figure in Zen. So did the first quotes from his, or constant discussion from his teacher sink in? What is formless, non-arising? What is biggest? The nature of dharmas. So here's another one, which I think will give you enough to go on. When he first went to India, he went to China. He went to southern China. And after an exchange with Emperor Wu there, who's supposed to be a real historical figure, and there's supposed to be some records of this. he decided that they weren't ready for Zen, and they moved on and they moved north, and they ended up at the Shaolin Temple, Shorinji, Kung Fu fame, Shaolin. He taught the monks karate, open hand combat. Supposed to be all true story. And his conversation with Emperor Wu went something like this. He had built a lot of, he was a Buddhist sponsor of Buddhism in China, early, very early. And he had built a bunch of temples. And he asked the master what merit for succeeding lives, future lives, he, Wu Ti, had accumulated thereby. Bodhidharma answered curtly, no merit. Now I don't want to take too long to get through this, but that doesn't necessarily, he's not necessarily answering that question directly. He's just saying no merit. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Then the emperor asked him what the supreme meaning of the sacred truth was. Vast emptiness, nothing sacred. Sometimes translated as nothing holy. Answered Bodhidharma. Now the emperor demanded to know, who is that in front of us? Don't know, replied Bodhidharma. Now I think we have to put ourselves back in that time and understand that Bodhidharma's Chinese was probably rudimentary. Or maybe his answers are curt because he's responding in Chinese, or maybe there's a translator there, maybe he's not. He's not going into a long dissertation, right? He's getting to the point. Don't know, replied Bodhidharma, who with this answer had really revealed the essence of his teaching to the emperor without the latter's catching on. So then he goes on to talk about how this showed him that they were not ready in that part of the country, so he moved on to northern China. So with that, let's just throw it up for grabs, and first brave person wants to come forward, please do so. Stand on the cushion, you make a little bow, you can kneel if you like, and then you make your statement. And you go from there.
Just going off of what you just said about Bodhidharma, the emperor, no self, no merit. Why didn't Bodhidharma just say no teaching?
Probably for the same reason we don't tell newcomers that Zazen is not meditation. It would just be confusing. And it would call for the, what are you doing here? Why come to China if there's no teaching? So in that sense, his answer about merit was definitely a response to the question. You should know they're doing this for your benefit.
Mm-hmm. Are thoughts form or emptiness?
What did you call them earlier when you showed me your notebook?
Brain farts.
Are farts empty?
Are things that are empty subject to the law of cause and effect?
No thing can be empty.
Is emptiness subject to the law of cause and effect?
In emptiness, there is nothing subject to anything.
thoughts are empty, they're not subject to anything. They're not subject to the law of cause and effect when they are, if they are empty.
The old saying was Yakujo. He said, one with the cause, one with causality, one with cause and effect, not subject to.
Last one. Is gravity, the law of gravity, the same type of law as the law of karma?
Indistinguishable.
Are thoughts subject to the law of gravity?
In origin.
Unclear.
If anything is subject to gravity, everything is.
Thank you for your teaching.
Grave thoughts. Maybe the one. Don't be shy. You may just be creating more flowers in air.
How is it that Zen can become an obstacle to one's spiritual growth?
Because we call it Zen.
How do I know what to call it when I'm doing it if it's not Zen?
There's no need to call it anything.
How then do I know when I'm doing it?
Not knowing you know is best. That's a quote.
How do I know when I am no longer stuck?
Clouds to the horizon, no barriers anywhere.
Am I then the cloud or the barrier?
I've said too much already.
Thank you for your teaching.
Anyone else unclear? You can stay where you are. You don't have to come up.
Unclear as to why you said too much.
It comes from, well, it's a general principle, but it comes from a particular incident where Huineng, you'll hear about this next Sunday, had fled to the south, taking the robe and bow, or given the robe and bow, but he wasn't yet declaring himself publicly. He was told to keep his light under a bushel by Hongren, the fifth patriarch. And he came to a monastery where monks were discussing the flag banner blowing in the breeze. You may have heard the story. And one monk is saying, arguing that the wind is moving and the banner is reacting or being moved by the wind. The other is arguing that the banner is moving. And Huineng makes the statement something to the effect that neither your mind is moving. And commentary on that koan is he said too much. There's a principle in Zen to not describe your Zen experience or the truth, not try to describe it. The teachings are broken into two large categories. One is a description of reality. One is a prescription for practice. Sometimes you can't sort the description from the prescription. And some of the like the Four Noble Truths, starting with the Four Noble Truths, they're both a description of reality and a prescription for practice. But sometimes that causes confusion. And I think it's like spoiler alerts. You don't want to try to just lead somebody by the nose, describe for them, what they can expect. We don't do guided meditation. That makes sense?
Mhm.
And also, I talk too much,
Have a follow-up question to that.
Okay. I know I can lean on you a little bit.
Yeah, just a little. So that was that. That last comment was very helpful to me because I think intuitively I maybe had been understanding that, but in reading koans and the stories of koans, and the students are charged with coming back with what does this mean, or to reflect on it. And the students who come up with just a very brief answer that you don't really understand, they seem to be the ones who got it, as opposed to the student who comes in with a little mini thesis as to what it's all about. So am I on the right track?
Well, we don't do koan practice for good reasons. We're not trained in it. And we make the case that in most cases of transmission or understanding of any kind, it's 100,000% dependent on the student, not on the teacher. And the proof of this is Bodhidharma's response to Hueke's conundrum that his mind was confused. Show me this confused mind. When I look for it, I can't find it. There, I've clarified your mind. Hueke did the same thing with Sengsan. Sengsan said, I'm trapped, or I'm bound, or I'm fettered. What is binding you? Same question. It still worked. Now, it wouldn't work if it weren't for the sincerity of the students. And they're believing that this person had, they're going for what this person meant for. And somehow they got there. And I'm not there yet. And so if you don't have that faith, you're going to trust in your teacher, and also trust in the fundamental mind that there is something to this. We're not just playing word games here. I did think about maybe we should make a game of this where we have prizes. Well, I'll talk to Ellen about that. Maybe she can figure out a way we can make this a game. Sorry, I was raised in the cornfields. Corny since you were. Where was I?
Thank you for teaching.
Anybody else unclear on that? Please.
Both your last comment and the example or the koan of the flag makes me curious about how we reconcile the sometimes necessary need for searching out causality, medicine, those kinds of things, versus the dropping of the need for searching out causality and just being.
If you look at Buddhism's teachings, like the 12-fold chain, it's sometimes called the chain of causality. And it starts with ignorance and consciousness arises and so forth, and go through, finally through birth and death and next cycle of life, so forth. So the Indians, mathematically minded, and just slicing and dicing things down to their very subtle causal relationships, you might say. But that is nowadays, it was also called the chain of independent or dependent origination. But now Okamura Roshi, is one of my teachers, recommends we call it interdependent origination. I joke that I'm registered interdependent politically. So if you think of interdependent origination, it's a different slight connotation than dependent origination, which is already pretty literal. But if you think of causality as algebraic, this happens, then that causes this, and that causes this to happen, so forth. I think it's a misunderstanding of this teaching. I'm a graphic designer, so I put these on poster. I'll show you later so I can. They're modeled three-dimensionally. So the Four Noble Truths are tetrahedron. So the existence of suffering is connected to the origin of suffering by that connection. The 4 points have 6 connectors. So it's a little more complex way of understanding the relationships. 12-fold chain of causation, the Eightfold Path, has 28 such connections. So what looks very simple is very complex description of the complexity of the reality. So you talk the talk, but you don't walk the walk. You're trying to have right speech, but you don't have right action. So that's a simple example of one connection. When you get to the 12-fold chain, and I put graphically, I added a perception, which is a skandha that's left out of the 12-fold chain for reasons that they're explainable. But when you put it back in with the rest of the other 4 skandhas, you end up with 13 points. So ignorance is at the center. But any point, and it becomes, this is a good word for it, it's a rhombicube icosahedron. That's what people call a vector equilibrium. So the 12 points that form the sphere and the 1 point in the center, right? This point in the center is ignorance. That's the first of the links in the chain. Everything arises out of ignorance. It's an innocent ignorance. It's not willful ignorance. But at any one point on the chain, it can collapse back to ignorance. So I don't know how many connections in between those points there are, but there's lots and lots and lots. So what Buddha was articulating in words is necessarily linear because language is linear. When you look at it as words on a page, it looks like a spaghetti noodle of words, right? It's just a linear thing. But when you model it like that, it's called semantic modeling. And you look at complexity of all the interrelationships of those things, you begin to see the teachings kind of like a crystalline grid of all these interconnected teachings. So back to your question, say it again.
How do we reconcile the search for causality with the letting go of causality?
Buddhism, I think it would be just like collapsing back to ignorance from all of the outer stages of development in your existence, knowing that we can collapse back to ignorance at any point. This is on a positive scale. It's not willful ignorance. This is the don't know mind. We can admit to ourselves we don't know. We don't know the first cause. You know, most religions, a lot of debates and around the Vatican and so forth are all about first causes and finalities and so forth. Buddhism admits that it's an infinite regress and we cannot find a first cause. And so, as Dogen said someplace, what is finally left is ambiguity. So we have to be comfortable with ambiguity. In that way, I think we solve the dilemma of causality. Yakujo poked the corpse of the fox out from under a bush and had the monks perform a priest ceremony for the fox. He explained that this was a person who was visiting in ghost form his lectures and came up to him one day afterwards and said he had been the abbot of the same monastery 500 years before. And somebody asked him, is the enlightened person subject to or free from the law of causality? And he answered free from. And so he was condemned to be reborn as a fox for 500 lifetimes. So he said, please free me from this. What is the answer? And that's where Hyakuju said this, the enlightened is one with the law of causality. So Buddhism is not about figuring out objectively, but self-identifying with the truth. The observer is part of the equation. So if we find our first cause personally, that's all the causality there is. But that's what we need to know. The what is my life about? Make sense?
It does. Thank you.
I'm beginning to worry. It's starting to make sense. You can do it from there if you want to.
Okay. We talk a lot about personal journeys, but we tend to focus more on male teachers than female teachers. So it makes me feel like the male teachers are more important.
You mean in the lineage?
Yes.
I think it's because they were all patriarchies. You know, there are plenty of stories. Dogen has a lot of stories about what he calls a great stout fellow, which is a woman. There was one who managed the gate to the monastery at the foot of the mountain, and all the bunch of pundits and monks would show up there, and they're going to climb the hill to go meet the master, and they would engage in dialogue with her, and she would just defeat them at every turn. So they ended up never going up the hill. They stayed there to learn from her. If you read Painting of Rice Cakes, Gabio, it's in Shobogenzo, Master Dogen's Painting of Rice Cakes is another story like that. It's related to another story where a woman is selling rice cakes. And it was one of the great pundits of the time. He's coming along with all of his carts full of manuscripts or scrolls, and he's going to give lectures somewhere, and he stops on the side of the road to buy rice cakes. And she asks him about what he's doing, and he's giving a lecture on the three minds, I think it was. The way we understand those, the way I understand those now, the three minds are magnanimous mind, nurturing mind, and joyous mind. Sen Shinji, I think it's called, three minds in Japanese. So she said, if you can tell me which one of your minds, which one of the minds will eat these rice cakes, I will sell them to you. He couldn't. So he gave up all of his books, changed his career. So there's case after case in history, but just in general, I think the governments were male dominated. There were very strong, famous empresses in China. And this history of the propagation of Zen, it was largely the women who got it funded, who got the funds allocated. They would go to their husband, the emperor, or whatever, and get them to build this monastery like that. So I think it's a historical anomaly.
Does this mean that there's less teachings available from, like, that were written down and that are like?
Right. There are notable exceptions, but in general, men were the politicians, and were in the court, and they did a lot of the transcription, a lot of the scholarly work, translating languages and like that. So I think it's more a social anomaly than intentional. But Buddhism also takes a very unusual perspective in the history of religions. The reason that the iconography, the statuary, and the paintings and so forth are androgynous is that the Buddha nature is not gendered. So if you come to realization of your Buddha nature, it's only incidental that you happen to be male or female. It's only a circumstance.
And yet, most of the people in the congregation
Most of the people,
are males.
men need Zen more than women. That's another cultural artifact, but I think it's true. Sensei used to say, Zen keeps the men younger and the women more beautiful. Wait. Somebody has to remind me of the time. I'm not here. Okay, we're there. This will be the last.
Sensei, the physical body from person to person shows lots of variability, but lots of similarity. The same is true of the brain, the same is true of the mind. Why can we give instruction about posture, but not give instruction about meditation?
Say that again?
Why can we give instruction about posture, but not about meditation?
Posture is meditation. So you mean mental meditation?
The inner workings of the mind.
Mind and body cannot separate. Dogen said, if you want the cart to go, to beat the ox, or to beat the cart. I said, most people say beat the ox, make the mind meditate. But I say beat the cart, make the body meditate. It's tethered to the cart just as much as the cart is tethered to the ox. So it's far easier. You can't change your mind. Seeking mind with discriminating mind is the greatest of all mistakes. Quote. As a caveat to that, I'd say in Dokusan and other situations, we certainly do engage in dialogue about mental constructs and so forth. Bodhidharma pointed out, he said, first of all, he said, you don't have to do Zazen. You can't prove that you have to do Zazen. We think we have to do Zazen because we carry so much baggage, and it takes a long time to get rid of it. But he said, when you do Zazen, 4 levels of observation, we observe the physical sensations. Not just body, but seeing, not just tactile, but seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, which adapt very quickly. It's basically a profound process of sensory adaptation that takes place. Then the thinking, as the 6th sense in Buddhism, undergoes that same kind of adaptation, but it takes a lot longer, as is the theory. And that's why it's placed at the end of form, feeling, thought, impulse, consciousness, and eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, mind. Right? So he said the physical sensations, that's one. Emotional sensations or mood swings is 2. Mental constructs, concepts, and ideas, that's 3. The first one is breathing, that's the 4th one. So he pointed out that these are the things we can observe in meditation. And what we observe about them is that they're all constantly changing and coming and going. Every one of the 4. Breath is constantly coming and going. We never breathe the same breath twice. We never really have the same thought twice. We think we do. Right? We never have the same physical sensation twice. We never have the same emotional mood swing twice. It feels the same, but it cannot possibly be. It's impossible. So witnessing this, those are the 4 main constituents that we identify with as self-identity. I am breathing. These are my thoughts. These are my feelings, right? But when you observe that there are transient and impermanent, imperfect, of course, yes, all the rest of it, then you see that they're in that sense empty. And so the so-called self, the self-identifies with all of that, also has to be impermanent, transient. Right? So what is the lesson we get from our observation and meditation? That's one of the lessons. Right? That's all we need to know. We don't have to have mental instructions. So let's just go around, give everybody a chance to ask or say something. We're closing out now. Joe, anything for you? Ethan?
Well, you mentioned, the only thing you mentioned that, well, you mentioned a couple things, but I found it interesting when you said that it's the student that like facilitates, or it's the student's responsiveness to teaching that makes a good student. And
If you're a coach and you have athletes, right, and you're teaching them gymnastics, if they're not willing to put in the work, no amount of coaching is going to help.
So, like, so you personally, having been apprenticed under someone for a while, and succeeding multiple students, at what point do you become a teacher?
I think it's kind of, they say, when you are ripe and ready, a teacher will appear. I think it's the same for teaching. When you're ripe and ready, students will appear. I do think that our method is observation of our teacher, imitation. You have to have the flexibility to imitate your teacher in the beginning, but at some point you have to have the flexibility to innovate and no longer imitate your teacher, because it turns out your students are not you and you are not your teacher. This is why Zen has had the flexibility of adaptability down through the cultures that it's survived through all these 2,500 years. But the apprentice mode, I think, is the mode that we use. It's basic observation, imitation. And so you become, you're an apprentice. If you enter the formal path as a disciple, you're apprenticing to your teacher. You become a journeyman at some point. You're taking on more and more responsibility. You have more and more competency, more and more confidence that this is not another scam of some sort. There's something real about this. Becoming intermediate, you might say, and eventually you yourself become master. But we don't master Zen. Zen masters us. We surrender to it, and it masters us. Michael. Hakim?
Are you a beginner?
Yes. Very poor one.
Online, Gaku-san says thank you.
Who?
Gaku-san?
Gaksan. Okay.
He says thank you and Yasha.
Gashro Gaksan. Okay, so let's close with the vows. Does somebody want to do the bell? Okay.
Beings are numberless, I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible, I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless, I vow to enter them. The Buddha way is unsurpassable, I vow to realize it. Beings are numberless, I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible, I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless, I vow to enter them. The Buddha way is unsurpassable, I vow to realize it. Beings are numberless, I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible, I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless, I vow to enter them. The Buddha way is unsurpassable, I vow to realize it.
Thank you for listening and for your patience. And let's leave no traces. Clean up behind yourselves. Somebody volunteer for 2 bucks.
We have a work party clean
Oh,
here.
work party.
Next Saturday, everyone.
Next Saturday, work party.
You can come in for an hour.
conference. It was wonderful.
I was bearded barbarian.
Yeah.
Yeah, those symbols.
Which we can make.
So Joe, what does it say?
Is that on a weekend?
I'm not sure about all of it, but it starts out with a Buddhist ancestor. And then I don't see, it looks like Dharma, but it says Dai.
I missed any of the other ones.
Wasn't there an ancestor named?
No,
like,
Oh,
the big
you're off.
meaning?
Yeah.
Dai or Dai.
I tried it. I
Dai.
tried it like once.
Grade something guy.
Times, but like this.
Yeah, the big meaning is, so it says Buddhist ancestor Dai.
I wonder if that's another name for Dharma.
I wonder.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You have time to get some lunch?
Yeah, maybe I'll try to look it up.